Three homeless children walking through the rain saw a wealthy rancher stranded with a broken wagon wheel. They had nothing, no food, no home, no future. But instead of walking away, they stopped and helped him. They worked in the mud, bleeding hands, no reward, no questions. And when the rancher offered them money, they refused. What happened the very next morning shocked everyone, because a covered wagon arrived at his ranch, and inside it was something that changed all of their lives forever. The plains of Wyoming stretched farther than the eye could hold, a restless ocean of dry grass bending under a hard wind that never seemed to stop. The sky hung wide, an endless pale blue fading into dust and heat, and somewhere along that long, empty road, three children kept walking, like they had nowhere else left in the world to go. The oldest was Caleb Hart, barely 16, but already carrying himself like a man who had buried too much, his shoulders squared against the wind, his eyes always searching the horizon, as if trouble might rise out of it at any moment. Beside him walked his sister Lila Hart, thin but strong, her sunburned face framed by loose strands of brown hair, and in her hands she carried a small tin box, the last thing their mother had ever owned. And behind them came little Jonah Hart, only 8 years old, stumbling now and then, but refusing to complain even when his boots were worn through and the ground bit at his feet. They had been walking for 3 days. 3 days since the fever took their parents. In a single night, leaving behind silence, an empty cabin, and a world that no longer had a place for them.
Caleb had not cried, not once, not when he
buried them, not when the neighbors turned them away, not even when the last piece of bread ran out. He had simply looked at the road and said, "We keep moving." So they did. The wind picked up again, pushing dust across their path, when suddenly a sharp, cracking sound split the air like a gunshot. Caleb stopped instantly, his hand lifting to signal the others to freeze. Ahead, about 50 yards, a large ranch wagon leaned hard to one side, one wheel broken nearly clean through, the wood splintered and jagged like bone, and beside it stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in expensive riding gear, his hat pulled low as he kicked the damaged wheel in frustration. Even from a distance it was clear this was no ordinary man. This was the kind of man who owned land for miles, the kind who gave orders and expected them followed, the kind who did not take kindly to strangers, especially not three ragged children with nothing to offer. Jonah whispered, "We should go around." Caleb did not answer. He studied the scene carefully. The horses were restless, the man angry, the wheel beyond simple luck but not beyond repair. Lila stepped closer to him, her voice soft but steady. "We can fix that." Caleb looked at her. She held his gaze without fear, the way their mother used to when she knew something was right. For a long moment the wind howled around them, and then Caleb made his choice. They walked forward. The man noticed them quickly, his posture stiffening as his hand hovered near his belt, not quite reaching for a weapon but ready. "That is close enough," he called out, his voice sharp and commanding. Caleb stopped a few feet away, his expression calm. "Your wheel is cracked," he said. "We can fix it." The man let out a short, humorless laugh. "You three?" Caleb did not blink. "Yes, sir." The man studied them more closely now, taking in their worn clothes, their tired faces, their empty hands. "And why would you do that?" Lila answered before Caleb could. "Because you need help." Something about the simplicity of her answer seemed to catch the man off guard. He frowned, then glanced at the broken wheel again, then back at them. "You fix it and I will pay you," he said finally. Caleb shook his head. "We are not asking for money." Now the man looked genuinely confused. "Then what do you want?" Caleb paused just long enough for the truth to settle. "Nothing." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind. Finally the man stepped aside. "You have 10 minutes, he said. Caleb moved immediately, dropping to one knee beside the wheel, his hands running over the damage, assessing every crack, every weakness. Lila opened the tin box, pulling out a few worn tools, a length of wire and 2 small nails, while Jonah hurried to gather stones and bits of wood from the roadside. They worked like a team that had done this 100 times before, because in truth life had taught them quickly that survival meant fixing what was broken with whatever you had. Caleb reinforced the split using a carved wedge of wood. Lila tightened the structure with wire, her fingers moving fast despite the cuts forming on her skin. Jonah held the wheel steady, his small arms shaking but determined not to fail. The man watched in silence, his earlier irritation slowly fading into something else, something quieter. Respect. Minutes passed and the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land. Finally Caleb stood, stepping back, It will hold, he said. The man approached cautiously, testing the wheel with his boot, then signaling the horses forward. The wagon rolled. Smooth, steady, strong. For a moment no one spoke. Then the man reached into his coat, pulling out a heavy leather pouch. Take it, he said. Caleb did not move. We said no. The man's voice hardened. You worked, you get paid. That is how this world works. Caleb met his gaze evenly. Maybe not always. That answer landed harder than anything else. The man stared at him, searching for weakness, for some hidden motive, but finding none. Just 3 children standing there with nothing, asking for nothing. Slowly he lowered the pouch. What are your names, he asked. Caleb hesitated, then answered. Caleb, Lila, Jonah. The man nodded once. Ethan Calloway, he said. A name known across the region. A cattle baron. A man whose land stretched farther than most towns. But the children did not react. Names like that meant nothing to them anymore. Without another word, they gathered their things and turned back toward the road. Ethan watched them go, something unsettled stirring deep inside him. He had spent his life building something solid, something powerful, something that made men respect him. But in all those years, no one had ever walked away from him like that. Not wanting anything, not fearing him, not needing him. And as the 3 small figures disappeared into the fading light, Ethan Calloway felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not anger, not pride, but a quiet question he could not ignore. What kind of strength walks away from wealth like it is nothing? That night the wind did not stop, and neither did his thoughts. Morning came slow over the Wyoming plains, the kind of morning where the sky turned pale before the sun had the courage to rise and the land sat quiet as if holding its breath. Ethan Calloway had not slept. He stood on the wide porch of his ranch house, staring out across miles of fenced land, cattle moving like shadows in the distance, the wind brushing through the grass in long, restless waves, but his mind was not on any of it. It was on 3 children who had nothing and yet had walked away from him like they owned something greater than anything he had ever built. He turned the thought over again and again, trying to make sense of it, but it refused to settle. Men had lied to him, cheated him, begged from him, feared him, but never that. Never quiet dignity, never refusal. The sound of hooves pulled him from his thoughts. One of his ranch hands rode up, fast dust trailing behind him. Mr. Calloway, he called out. There is a wagon coming up the south trail. Ethan frowned. Visitors were rare and never unannounced. He stepped down from the porch, his boots hitting the dry ground with purpose. What kind of wagon? Covered the hand replied, looks like it has been traveling a long way. Ethan narrowed his eyes, already walking toward the edge of the property. Something in his chest tightened, not fear, not quite anticipation, but something close. They waited. Minutes stretched, and then through the rising dust it appeared, a covered wagon rolling slow but steady, pulled by 2 strong horses. Its canvas worn but well kept, its movement deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. It did not stop at the outer fence. It came straight up the drive. Ethan stood still, watching every detail. Every movement. The driver sat tall, steady, hands on the reins, face shadowed beneath a wide brim hat. The wagon came to a stop just yards from him. Silence settled heavy and thick. Then the driver moved. She stepped down, a woman not young but not old either. Her posture straight, her expression calm but carrying a weight that spoke of years spent fighting for something that mattered. She looked directly at Ethan. You are Ethan Calloway, she said. It was not a question. He nodded slowly. That depends on who is asking. She studied him for a moment as if measuring something unseen. My name is Margaret Hale, she said. I run a home for children who have no one left. Something shifted instantly. Ethan felt it before he understood it. The back of the wagon opened, and then they stepped out. Caleb first, then Lila, then Jonah. For a brief second, Ethan did not move. They looked different, cleaner fed, but still the same steady presence, the same quiet strength. Jonah spotted him first, his face lighting up with something close to relief. Caleb remained still, his expression guarded but not afraid. Lila gave a small nod, like she had expected this moment all along. You found a place, Ethan said, his voice lower now. Margaret stepped forward. They found us, she said. Ethan glanced at her. What does that mean? It means, she replied, that not all lost things stay lost if someone is willing to look. Her words carried weight, not dramatic, not forced, just true. Ethan crossed his arms. So why bring them here? Margaret did not hesitate. Because they told me about you. Ethan let out a quiet breath. And what exactly did they say? Caleb answered this time. We said you let us help. That's simple. Ethan almost scoffed, but something stopped him. Margaret continued, they told me. You offered money. and they refused, and you did not force it on them. That matters more than you think. Ethan shifted, slightly uncomfortable with the direction of this conversation. I did not bring you here for praise, he said. Good, Margaret replied, because that is not why we came. Another pause. Then she stepped closer, her voice steady. I came to see what kind of man lets 3 starving children walk away with nothing and still does not stop them. That hit harder than anything else. Ethan opened his mouth to respond but found no immediate answer. Because he did not know, the truth sat somewhere deeper than pride, deeper than habit. Finally he spoke. They did not want it. Margaret nodded exactly, and most men would not understand that. Ethan looked past her at the wagon, then at the children. What do you want? Margaret turned slightly, gesturing toward the wagon. Come and see. Ethan frowned. See what? A different way, she said simply. Days later, Ethan stood at the edge of something he never expected to find. The home sat in a wide valley surrounded by simple wooden buildings. Children moved everywhere, laughing, working, learning. Older ones helping younger ones. There was structure, but also something else, something harder to name. Hope. It was not loud, not forced, not something spoken about. It was just there. Margaret walked beside him. We take in those no one else will. She said, we teach them, we feed them, we give them a future. Ethan watched as Jonah ran past, chasing another boy, laughter breaking free and away. It had not before. Lila stood near a group of girls learning to mend clothes, her focus sharp, her hand steady. Caleb worked with 2 older boys, repairing a fence. His movements confident, his voice giving quiet direction. They belong here, Ethan said before he could stop himself. Margaret looked at him. Yes, she said, they do. Silence stretched between them as Ethan took it all in. Something inside him shifted again, stronger, this time like a door opening that had been closed for years. You cannot run this place on hope alone, he said finally. Margaret allowed herself a faint smile. No, we cannot. Ethan nodded slowly, his mind already working through numbers. Land resources, possibilities. What do you need? The question hung there heavy with meaning. Margaret's expression changed, not surprise, not excitement, but recognition. Careful, she said softly. That is how it begins. Ethan looked at her. Good, he replied, because I think I am ready for that. Time passed. Weeks turned into months. The man who once measured his worth in land and cattle began to measure it in something far less visible but far more lasting. Food delivered without announcement, repairs made without expectation, new buildings rising where there had been none. But more than that, he returned again, and again, not as a benefactor, but as someone learning how to listen, how to give without control, how to see value where he once saw none. And the children, they grew, stronger, brighter, no longer just surviving but living. One evening as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the valley, Ethan stood watching them. Caleb approached, standing beside him. You did not have to do all this, Caleb said. Ethan kept his eyes on the horizon. Maybe not, he answered. Then why did you? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Because the day you fixed that wheel, he said slowly, I realized something was broken that I never tried to fix. Caleb looked at him. What was that? Ethan finally turned his gaze toward the boy. Me. The wind moved softly through the valley, carrying laughter with it. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Calloway felt something settle deep inside him. Not wealth, not power, but peace. And it had all begun with 3 children on a dusty road who chose to help a stranger and walk away with nothing, only to return with something far greater, a reason for everything to change.